this very moment.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hi, Merle. So I'm on my
So you're
laptop.
relaxing. You're relaxing and enjoying your Zoom life.
Learning.
Oh man, I'm zooming around. So I got the old laptop. Susan's got
Yeah.
hers. The other one's running the other meeting. So
Uh-huh.
anyhow, I'm
Beautiful.
anxious to, are we talking or are we going to hear music too?
Oh, you're going to hear a lot of music today.
Okay.
A lot of music. Today's show is the great cantors, the greatest cantors from the golden age of cantors.
Oh, cool.
And I gave it a subtitle of America, Here We Come.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, our three cantors that we're going to highlight today are arguably the three of the greatest, if not the three greatest cantors who ever lived. And of course, very important because they were the first superstar cantors to come from Europe and come to the United States. In two of their cases, they came here and stayed and had long positions in New Jersey and in the Bronx. And in one of their cases, he came to the United States and gave concerts, and then went back to Europe and met a tragic ending, and we'll get into those details. But they came at a time when, really, the turn of the century, and they were, as I mentioned, they became superstars in the Jewish world, and even in the world beyond. The world of Jews and synagogue life. Their talents reached the entire world through recording and live appearances. So we're going to start with a little background to set the whole stage for this quote-unquote golden age of cantors. So from the latter half of the 19th century in the European centers, all the great synagogues, the large synagogues in every major community, from the Ukraine to Russia to Germany to Austria, all over Eastern Europe, they all prided themselves. And what was most important to those synagogues and to their financial well-being was to have the greatest cantor. And let me explain. We're talking about the traditional world of Jews, the European world of Jews. And in those worship experiences, which by our standards today were extraordinarily long, the success of those synagogues and of those services depended almost entirely on the talent and the skill of the chazan. Because the entire service was sung from beginning to end. In most of those synagogues, there was no such thing as a rabbinic sermon. Most of the time, the rabbis wouldn't even be on the bima. Rabbis in those communities were judges. They decided matters of law within the community. They were Talmid Chachamim. They were the scholars of the community and therefore the judges, and people would come to the rebbes for legal advice, for moral advice, and for ritual advice. They basically had no role in the worship service. The tradition was in those days that the rabbi would give 2 sermons a year. One on the Shabbat preceding Passover. Passover is known in rabbinic literature as Hechag, the festival. And it was important for the rabbi, the Shabbat before Passover, to give detailed instruction on all the laws and the rituals of Pesach. And it's certainly in terms of home ritual, Passover to this day far outweighs any other holiday, including Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Those are all major holidays that primarily take place in the synagogue. But as we all know, yes, in a traditional synagogue, Passover has major services, but the holiday, the Chag of Pesach, takes place in the home. So the rabbis would speak on that Shabbat Hagadol, the great Sabbath. That's the Sabbath. That's what the Shabbat before Passover became known as. And Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The rabbis would give an impassioned sermon imploring their congregants to make amends, all right, before Yom Kippur. So 2 times a year, which meant that worship in those traditional synagogues all over Europe were conducted by the Chazan. And by the end of the 19th century, the synagogue music in those centers had become probably reached its apex in terms of quality, sophistication, and vocal artistry. In the big centers in Russia, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Paris, you had music directors, chazanim of extraordinary vocal skill and talent, which you're going to hear today. And that's what people came for. Now, these great chazanim were not, they didn't function necessarily the way a cantor today does, which means you sign a contract and you work your 50 hours a week and you teach and B'nai Mitzvah and life cycles and Shabbat and high holidays and funerals and life cycles, anything else you could imagine. Those chazanim would be hired to serve at one synagogue, but within those contracts, they would be given a great deal of freedom to concertize. And also, they would have any number of Shabbatot off, at which time they would be itinerant chazanim. They would go to other synagogues around Europe to conduct services for a fee. So they were both itinerant artists, as well as hoping to enjoy the knowledge that they had a paycheck from one synagogue. Right? This was the case with all 3 of the great chazanim we're going to hear today. And that tradition would continue when the great chazanim came to the United States, early part of the 20th century, and up until World War II, where the great chazanim would perhaps sing 2 Saturday mornings a month, and the other weekends they would be free to go lead services and concertize to make additional money. And I will tell you, I've read so many accounts that synagogues in the United States depended for their financial well-being on the high holidays. There was no such thing as synagogue membership or synagogue dues. You would have to buy tickets for the high holidays. That's how synagogues paid their employees, and it's how they existed. So the greater chazan you have on the high holidays, the more tickets you sell, and the more you can charge for those tickets. So there were,
Hi, Don.
Hi.
This is Donna, Lady Madonna. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm enjoying this because I am a musician. It's very interesting.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask you to mute yourself just for a moment.
Oh, yes, sir. No
That's
worries.
okay. And then we're going to open the session later. I'm glad you're here. You're going to hear some amazing things in a few moments. There was fierce competition among synagogues, and now I'm really talking about New York City and the areas around New York City. From the turn of the century, as I mentioned, right up through and after World War II. One of my great teachers, who we're going to hear in later sessions, Cantor Moshe Ganchoff, told me that he would often make $2,000 on a weekend. This is in the 1940s. That's an extraordinary amount of money. He would do a service in the morning, and then he would do 3 or 4 or 5 weddings on the weekend. And so if you were a great chazan, that's how you made your money, right? And you'd receive a certain fee for doing the high holidays. So great competition among these great chazanim. And they really were of legendary status. When you read all the research and the articles and essays and personal accounts, they were superstars. They were superstar performers, and they had fans all over the world. They come to America, turn of the century, and our first great chazan that we're going to hear in a few moments was Gershon Sirota. Gershon Sirota. Born in Odessa, and he was the first chazan to begin to record, mainly because that's when recordings came into being. In about 1903, in Europe, the first recordings come into being. And Sirota, along with Caruso, were of two of the first several great vocalists to make records, and thereby, once, with the invention of recordings, their fame became magnified. Because as those recordings would be pressed and distributed, millions more people came to know their talent and to hear their singing. So Sirota is the first chazan to record as far back as 1903. 1903. And before you hear him, a little bit about his life. As I mentioned, he began his career in Odessa, which was then one of the great cultural centers in Europe and a great center of Jewish learning and scholarship. He then traveled to Vilna, perhaps the most elevated cultural Jewish center in all of Europe, where he had his first pulpit. In 1902, he was privileged to sing at a reception in honor of Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. And then in 1907, he assumed the position of cantor in the prestigious Tlomaki Street Synagogue in Warsaw. This was the largest synagogue at that time in all of Europe, in all of Europe's largest community, the Jewish community of Warsaw. While he was the cantor there, he, as I mentioned earlier, continued his concert appearances all over Europe, sang in a concert at Carnegie Hall, and began to make recordings. Okay. And the first Jewish record were made in Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg, and from there spread throughout the entire Jewish world. And as the technology improved over the next decade or so, you can listen to their recordings from the earliest years through the next 15, 20 years, and with the growth and the improvement of the recordings themselves, you would hear the growth of their singing, and you could actually hear the true quality of their voices. It's interesting that after a number of years, Sirota eventually left that synagogue over a dispute of how much time he was spending away from the temple, touring all over the place. And he would be replaced by another one of the greatest cantors of all time, and we're going to hear him at our next session. Even the great Caruso, who had the occasion of hearing Sirota sing live twice, is quoted as saying he was the greatest singer he ever heard in his life. That was Enrico Caruso about Sirota. So Sirota's voice, as you will hear, was an astounding vocal instrument of tremendous power, color, technical facility. You will hear the rapid coloratura, fast singing notes that he mastered. But it's a powerful, emotional voice, and both a powerful dramatic voice and the ability to sing rapid passages, which is extraordinarily rare, if almost impossible, to hear in any other singers. Sirota, the end of his life is a tragic and sad account. He was here in the United States concertizing in New York. He received a telegram that his wife had fallen ill. His wife and his family still were living in Warsaw. This is now in the 1940s. And he goes back, and of course, he's in the Warsaw Ghetto, and it's the occasion of the Warsaw Uprising, where the Nazis are surrounding the Warsaw Ghetto, preparing to demolish it. And these extraordinary, brave Jews decided to fight, and they held off the German army for months. But Sirota, in the final stages of the Warsaw Ghetto, the Warsaw Uprising, he was murdered along with more than 13,000 other Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. But now let's hear what was legendary about this amazing singer and chazan. The first piece we're going to hear is Sirota singing Adonai, Adonai, which occurs during the Torah service of festivals and especially on the high holidays. It is a quote from the Torah. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. It is known as the 13 attributes of God, and it is a plea. It's the only time in the Torah where the name of God appears 2 times in a row. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, God merciful, abundant in mercy, long to anger, quick to kindness. And here is one of his choir directors, was a man by the name of Abraham Bernstein. This is his composition. This is Sirota's recording from more than 100 years ago. Here is Sirota singing Hashem, Hashem. Wow. That recording was made almost 100 years ago. And to hear the quality of that voice from a recording from 100 years ago I don't even know how to describe it. And to hear those two boys, probably 10 or 11 years old, we should mention that these synagogues they were known as the chor shuls, synagogues with big choirs. And the choral tradition of the synagogue was a huge part of the synagogue worship experience. And they were all made up of men and boys, of course, in those days. And that little duet in the middle there, two young kids. That really, I wasn't ready for that. So the next piece we'll hear from Gershon Sirota is one of the pieces that, along with that first one of his quote-unquote signature pieces, if you will, is the Ritzeh, which is from the Musaf service, the morning Shabbat service. It was written by another one of his music directors, Aryeh Schlossberg. And this recording actually was made even earlier than the first one. So here is Sirota singing this Ritzeh. And by the way, with most of these pieces we hear today, every cantor since then has sung these same pieces and done their best to imitate them. Some doing it fairly well, but always falling short. So here is Gershon Sirota singing Ritzeh. Yeah, every cantor since then has tried to sing that piece, Ritze, and some have done it well, but none quite like Sirota. Again, you hear the use of that all-male choir and that duet passage in the middle at V'techazena, common feature in a lot of old world synagogue music, where the cantor would sing a duet with any number of the boy altos. Right? This next piece is called Adin Teure mit Gott. And the story here is Adin Teure means a judgment. A judgment against God. The Jewish people are coming before God with a case, a judgment against God for all that God has not done. We sing your praises, and yet here we are, we suffer. Right? And this is known as the rabbi from Berdichev's case against God. And at the end, it ends in a triumphant statement in praise of God. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei rabbah. But the rest of the piece is in Yiddish. We pray to you, God. We sing your praises. We hold you high above the Kaiser, the king, the ruling government. Why have you forsaken us? And then, but nevertheless, we praise you, Yiskadal v'yiskadash. So here is Sirota singing Adin Teure mit Gott. So that piece begins. The rabbi from Bardichev is approaching God very carefully, like Dorothy approaching the Wizard of Oz. Begins softly. Guten Morgen, dear. Good morning to you, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe. I am, and he announces him, I am Rabbi so-and-so from Bardichev, son of Sarah. I come to bring a case before you, my God. And then says, we praise you all the time, no matter what. The Engländer, was sagen sie? What do the English say? Right? The Kaiser is the Kaiser, and the king is the king. The Italians say this, and the Germans say this, but we say, Hamelech. There's a beautiful phrase, Hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. That's an important phrase in the morning of the high holidays. We address you, the king, who sits on his throne of glory. And then there's the impassioned plea, please God, have mercy on us. Yiskadal v'yiskadash. Powerful, powerful piece. And now, Sirota, as I mentioned, when he came to the United States, superstar. And many try to convince Sirota and other of these great early Chazanim to become opera singers. But these opera singers were also very devout Orthodox Jews. So that was just never going to happen. But in Sirota's case, he did record several arias. He did not know Italian, but he had someone just teach him a few of these arias. And I'm going to play for you his recording now of that spectacular, beautiful tenor aria from Puccini's Tosca, E lucevan le stelle. You can tell that he did not know Italian because he's breathing in the middle of words, but you can understand what Caruso was responding to when he heard Sirota and said, the greatest voice I've ever heard in my life. So here is Sirota singing E lucevan le stelle from Puccini's Tosca.
Lucia
Astounding. That is just astounding. So we'll take a little moment for a conversation, and then we'll go on with our second great cantor who came to America in the first decade. So any responses to
Yeah, do they have any of those recordings that are not that have been unscratched, so to speak, with
it's a lot of these early recordings, they were all made on 78s, and the original tapes of them are long gone. So from a lot of these early ones, in most cases, this is about the best we can do. But thank God we have those. Right? Now, you'll hear, as I mentioned, that as we go on into the second and third decades of the 20th century, the recordings become much more of higher quality, quality sound. And you'll notice that. And when we get to our third and last artist this morning, which is Yossele Rosenblatt, you're going to hear two versions of the same prayer. One is the original recording, and then in the last 5 years, a new recording was made, digitally enhanced, and a composer wrote new orchestral accompaniments to the original recording of Rosenblatt. So you'll get to hear what that would sound like, the original, and then in an enhanced contemporary version, right? So again, Gershon Sirota, certainly one of the greatest tenors in recorded history, not just cantors, but tenors who've ever lived and sung and made a recording. Now we go on to our second artist, cantor Zawel Kwartin. His Hebrew name was Zebulun, but he was known as Zavel. Also Eastern European, Russian born, near Romania. Also blessed with a beautiful, rich, expressive tenor voice, almost even a little bit more of a baritonal quality. But you'll hear his style very different from Sirota. All these chazanim share one particular technical feature. They could all sing fast passages with such dazzling mastery. And in my life, all the opera singers that I've known and am close friends with, they marvel at this. They just can't understand how can they do that. I mean, it's an extraordinary feature of cantorial music in particular. You don't hear too much of it these days. Occasionally, you'll hear a few phrases from yours truly, but you certainly don't hear any of that style in any Reform synagogue, and not in too many conservative synagogues anymore anyway. But Zawel Kwartin also came to America, became a superstar, also began recording in the latter part of the first decade of the 20th century on into the 20s and 30s, toured all over the world, gave a recital at the Metropolitan Opera House in 1927, and served a congregation in New Jersey for about 24 years. He actually was one of the few who lived a fairly long life. He lived to be, I believe, 83 years old, which was highly unusual for those days. So now we'll hear two selections from Zawel Kwartin. The first one, Don, refresh my memory. We have, is it Hana Shamalach?
You have.
Ooh. Or Vial Yadeh.
it'll be a surprise. You have Viala Day.
Okay. So this first piece, before we play it, there are three main sections to the morning service of Rosh Hashanah: Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. Malchuyot addresses God. Malchuyot from the word Melech, God as King. And each of these sections are highlighted by 10 verses from the Torah. And these verses all address God in this particular section as King of the world. Melech, right? The common refrain where Melech al kol haaretz, King of the world. The last section there is a quote from the prophets. And this particular piece is Kwartin's own composition. It too became a famous, legendary piece among Chazanim. Everyone has tried to sing it and imitate Kwartin. They can't do it. So here is Kwartin singing the last several phrases from the end of the Malchuyot section of Rosh Hashanah morning. V'al yedei avadecha hanaviim. The words of the prophets are written. God is King of the world. Here is the great Zawel Kwartin.
Sarah,
astounding voice, totally different sound, different style than Sirota. Very moving and passionate and rich. That particular section ends with, as it is written, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That's how we end the Malchuyot, the kingship of God section, praising God as the one and only God. The second piece we'll hear now from Kwartin is a prayer titled Haneshamalach. It appears in our High Holiday Liturgy, also on Slichot. The soul you have given us belongs to you, God. Haneshama lach, v'haguf palach. And then, chusa alamalach, please God, have mercy on us. Have mercy and take us into account. And here is, again, Kwartin singing in a style that is no one else's. No one else sounds like Kwartin, and this is his own composition as well. So, Haneshamalach by Zawel Kwartin.
Be a
pretty overwhelming. And you may have noticed,
Too erotic, Rabbi. Too
isn't it?
erotic.
Right? You know, look, they lived a very different life than we did, didn't they? And they just poured it out. And towards the end of the piece, he started saying in Yiddish, "Oy vey, oy vey, oy vey is mir," right? Splicing it into the Hebrew.
So beautiful, and
Isn't
you
it?
can, it's majestic.
It is majestic. It is. It is. This comes from, you know, a different time and a different place and a totally different life experience for all of them. You know, this was European Jewry who lived as third-class citizens at best and often lived precariously at the whim of the dominant culture or army or king or whomever. And you can hear it in every note. In every note.
I felt God's Hashem's presence in my little studio as he was singing, bringing God's presence into wherever you're at when you're worshiping like that.
I believe you are exactly right. Exactly right. It's undeniable. Undeniable. So that was Zawel Kwartin. And our third and final artist of today, these are, I'm going in chronological order, so it was Sirota, Kwartin, and Rosenblatt, Yossele Rosenblatt, who we're going to hear in a moment. They were the first three to come to the United States in the first decade of the 20th century and established themselves as superstars. None surpassed Yossele Rosenblatt in terms of his massive popularity all over the world, especially at this time in the United States. And he became so famous that before we go today, you're going to see him in a cut from the original film The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson, where Rosenblatt is in the film as himself singing on the stage, and the Jolson character, the jazz singer, you know, he's brought up Jewish, his father is a chazan, he leaves for fame and fortune, and he comes back and he hears this chazan, and of course it all's well that ends well. It inspires him and he goes back to the synagogue on Yom Kippur to join his father for services, right? But imagine a chazan being in a motion picture, singing as himself with his hat and his beard. You couldn't imagine see that today, unless maybe if it was a cartoon, right? So that's how famous Rosenblatt would become. He would sell millions of records. Millions of records. This is in the 1920s and 30s. Every Jewish home in America had at least one or more 78s of Yossele Rosenblatt. And so we begin. Rosenblatt was born in 1882, lived a relatively short life, died in 1933. But he also was born in Bila Tserkva, also in the Russian Empire. He came from a long line of Cantors, grew up in a devout, ultra-Orthodox home. Like all of these chazanim, they all began singing in the choirs of their synagogues. And that's where they had their first experiences. He sang in his synagogue choir. He was lauded as a child prodigy. And then they moved to Austria when he was 7. When he was 17 years old, he went to Vienna for several months, where he officiated at some of the largest synagogues there. And then he toured throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire, occupied a major position in Hamburg, Germany. And then in 1912, he moves to New York, to Harlem, to take a position at the Orthodox synagogue Ohab Tzedek. He was there for 15 years, 1927. He leaves there, and during the next year, he leads services in a large performance hall in Chicago and then in Detroit, tours all over the United States, Minneapolis, Seattle, Indianapolis, Columbus, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, all over the United States, right? And then his last congregation, he signed a 10-year contract with the congregation Anshe Sfard in Borough Park, Brooklyn. He, of course, made a lot of money, sold millions of records. But alas, he was taken in by a couple of scam artists, lost his entire fortune. His final days, he moved to Israel and died there pretty much in abject poverty. But during his life, he was the most famous cantor then, and to this day, the most famous cantor in our history. His style, as you'll hear, also beautiful, rich, baritonal tenor voice, extensive range, very emotional, even more emotional in a certain way than Kwartin. And he had this extensive range. He would often suddenly go into head voice, into falsetto, to express something very intimate and very, very quietly. So we're going to hear several selections from Yossele Rosenblatt. The first, I'm just checking my list here, is
Hineni original.
So one of Rosenblatt's most famous pieces is Hineni. The Hineni prayer is sung only on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a prayer that is really known as the Chazan's prayer. Hineni heonimi ma'as, here I stand, poor in deeds, poor in merit, and I'm selected to pray on behalf of all of the Jewish people. I'm not worthy. And this is a moment that happens just before the big service on Rosh Hashanah, right before Unatan HaTokef, and the three sections we mentioned, Malchi, Zikron, Shofrot. Chazan's prayer, begging God, please accept me and my prayers, even though I don't merit it, on behalf of my congregation. This also became a legendary piece. First, you're going to hear it in its original recording, and then, as I mentioned earlier, you'll hear some of it in an updated, digitally restored, with a symphony orchestra accompaniment written to it. So first, the original Hineni by Yossele Rosenblatt.
Hineni heyuni miyemau Niyerosh Benifad mipachad Yoshev Vehilos Yiserove Modulis hanin lifonechu alam hu yisruvein asher shluchuni v'yafa pishivni chidai v'yugubu lechach לכן אבקש ממך, אלוקי אברהם, אלוקי יצחק, ואלוקי ויעקב, אשר אנכי ילך ויבוא אמר מבקש רחמים רחמים ובוא אליי יבוא אליי ויבוא לשכנך ונועל תפשיים בך תמועצי ויאל תחייבים בבואנו ואיסאי כי חייתי יופי שוויאבוני ויאלי כל מה בפשובי ויאל יבוי שובי ויאל לבוי שבו וקבץ אלו אסי Sila zake verogir O vieca e novei Uscunai me guedal Vecohoi noi novoim Vedavas me yuvrabim abriyo ותיגר בסועתיו ותיגר בסועתיו לבוא יסילני והנו תגלנו אליך ושובנו תחסה
Now that recording, also from the 1930s, that's the original. Now we'll hear just a little bit of the same recording, digitally enhanced, with a new orchestration accompanying it. Shalom Don, if you let's pull that tune again now, if you will. So it's fascinating. There are still, great fans out there of these great cantors, and so much so that one wanted to make a new recording based with the original materials, enhance it digitally and with a new contemporary orchestration. Our next piece from Rosenblatt, what do we have, Don? What do we have on our menu next?
Have the jazz singer.
Well, so we're gonna conclude with this selection. This is a clip from the original film, The Jazz Singer, which starred Al Jolson. And by the way, it was I believe it was the first talkie made in the United States, starring Al Jolson, and Rosenblatt performs as himself in this film. I do want to let everybody know I'm going to be off for the next 2 Mondays. We're actually going to get out of town for a few weeks and go up to Carpinteria and sit on the beach, get retooled. So we'll be back 3 weeks from today with a New Music Matters, and it will be Great Cantors Series Part 2. So we'll close today with this scene from the original Jazz Singer with Yossele Rosenblatt. Imagine in those years for an Orthodox Chazan to be achieve the fame, the status to warrant performing in a motion picture, the first talkie. That was the great Yossele Rosenblatt. So actually, maybe we'll just take a couple of minutes if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question. You can unmute yourselves and we'll just chat for a few minutes and then we'll...
I'm just wondering, how was an Orthodox Jew accepted in that situation in America? Was there any anti-Semitism at all, or his voice just overcame it?
Well, clearly there was anti-Semitism throughout America. And it's very interesting because he became in disfavor with certain segments of the Orthodox community because they saw it as an abandonment, to move into the secular world was an abandonment of all their values. And an Orthodox Jew had no business and no place doing something like that. So he kind of, got it from both sides. But it is a testament, number one, to his fame personally, but also to the elevated status of the cantor in the Jewish world in those days. Their status preceded, that coming to America all over Europe. As I mentioned, they were stars. Everybody knew who the Chazan was at any big synagogue throughout Europe, right? It would be known as, that's Sirota Shul, that's Kusavitsky Shul. Those synagogues were not known by the names of the rabbi. So they were folk heroes. They were great artists and folk heroes. And of course, in time in America, that does change. But in this era, the pre-war era in America, in the traditional, the non-reform world, Chazanim enjoyed positions of elevated status within the Jewish communities and as great performing artists. And as we'll see as we go through this series, a few weeks ago the show was some of the greatest Jewish opera singers. And we spent some time with Richard Tucker and Jan Pierce. So they all also grew up in the shul. That was their training ground and became chazanim. Then they became opera singers. Unlike their predecessors, who those avenues really weren't open to them in those times, right? So it's fascinating trajectory in history for our people.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My great pleasure. Anyone else?
This was amazing. Thank you.
Yes,
You're
me.
very welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Don. I want to say you have a beautiful voice,
Thank you so much.
and Cantor Picot. And I noticed that they recorded on Columbia Records back then.
They surely did.
Amazing.
All the big labels. Columbia, RCA,
Mm-hmm.
all the big recording companies recorded all the great cantors in those days. Yeah.
Well, thank you for everything, and be safe and stay well, and
You're
have
welcome.
a wonderful trip to the beach.
Thank you so much. Everyone
Thank
be
you.
well, stay well,
You
wear your
too.
masks wherever you go,
Exactly.
because we're in for another rough ride now.
Yes. Be
Right.
safe.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.